So, good afternoon for an all present in the webinar. And today's topic is we have to celebrate the Environment Day, and the resource person is Vishwambar Chaudhary sir. So, he's a well-known speaker and expert in the area of this environment studies and science. Friends, environment needs to be protected against every odds. We know that we are suffering from this COVID pandemic also, and this is due to unbalance in the environment. World Environment Day is celebrated by United Nations, and throughout the world it is celebrated. विद्यार्थी मित्र हो, आता वृक्षारोपण करणे काळाची गरज आहे. आजच आमच्या कॅम्पसमध्ये मला आवडेल चौधरी सरांना सांगायला की याच्यापूर्वी जस्ट त्या कार्यक्रमाच्या अगोदरच आमच्या कॅम्पसमध्ये जवळपास 100 ट्री प्लांटेशन केलेलं आहे. सर्व स्टाफ आणि सर्व काही टीचिंग स्टाफ, नॉन टीचिंग स्टाफ त्यामध्ये हजर होता, त्यांनी केलेलं आहे. आता वातावरणामध्ये एन्व्हायरमेंटमध्ये जे प्रॉब्लेम्स आहेत त्याच्यावर आपण प्रकाश टाकणारच आहात. परंतु मला जे थोडक्यात सांगायचं आहे की वॉटर पोल्युशन असेल, एअर पोल्युशन असेल, किंवा सध्या ऑक्सिजनचा जो काही लेवल कमी झालेली आहे, प्रत्येक ठिकाणी आपल्या ऑक्सिजनची रिक्वायरमेंट आहे. आपण जर ट्री प्लांटेशन वाढवलं तर आपोआपच माणसाची इम्युनिटी पण पॉवर वाढणार आहे. त्यामुळे निसर्गाच्या विरुद्ध गेल्यानंतर काय होतं याची प्रचिती आपल्याला आता बऱ्यापैकी मानवाला येते आहे. कारण प्रत्येक वेळेस मानव आपण दोन गोष्टी आहेत, इनोव्हेशन्स अँड टेक्नॉलॉजी, ही पुढे चाललेली आहे. परंतु त्याचबरोबर जर इनोव्हेशन टेक्नॉलॉजी करत असताना जर का आपण निसर्गाचा आणि त्याच्या बॅलन्सचा विचार नाही केला तर हे इनोव्हेशन्स अँड टेक्नॉलॉजी कदाचित याला मारक ठरू शकते मानवाला, याच्यावर सर बोलतील. त्यामुळे कुठेतरी एक बॅलन्स राहणं गरजेचं आहे. त्यामुळे विद्यार्थी आणि सर्व स्टाफ यांना माझी विनंती राहील या वर्ल्ड एन्व्हायरमेंट डेच्या अनुषंगाने की सर्वांनी, प्रत्येकाने कमीत कमी एक तरी झाड लावून त्याचा सांभाळ करावा. नुसतं झाड लावून चालत नाही. सरांना मी विनंती करेल, आमच्या कॅम्पसमध्ये तुम्ही जर कधी आलात तर बघा की सर्व 55 एकरचा कॅम्पस असून याच्यामध्ये हजारो वृक्ष आहेत. आम्ही जिवंत केलेले आहेत, ठेवलेले आहेत, सांभाळलेले आहेत. आणि एक आमच्या कॅम्पसमध्ये जे टेम्परेचरची लेवल आहे ती पण बाहेरच्या वातावरणापेक्षा आमच्या कॅम्पसचं टेम्परेचर हे कमी आहे. वॉटर कन्झर्वेशन केलेलं आहे आणि छतावरचं पूर्ण जे पाणी आहे हे एका ठिकाणी आम्ही घेऊन ते विहिरीमध्ये पर्क्युलेट केलेलं आहे आणि ते पाणी आम्ही पिण्यासाठी सुद्धा वापरतो. आणि सिवेज वॉटर ट्रीटमेंट प्लांट सुद्धा आमच्याकडे आहे, जेणेकरून जे काही वेस्ट वॉटर आहे ते आम्ही ट्री प्लांटेशनला वापरतो. असे वेगवेगळे उपक्रम या महाविद्यालयामध्ये केले जातात. NSSच्या माध्यमातून असेल, विद्यार्थ्यांमध्ये इन्व्हॉल्व असतात आणि एक आदर्श कॅम्पस बनवण्याचा आमचा प्रयत्न आहे. या अनुषंगाने मी माननीय डॉक्टर विश्वंभर चौधरी सर हे वेल नोन, सर्वांना माहीत आहेत, एक अभ्यासू व्यक्तिमत्व आहे. हमेशा वेगवेगळ्या माध्यमातून ते मार्गदर्शन करत असतात. मला वाटतं आपल्या विद्यार्थ्यांसाठी आणि स्टाफसाठी फार मोठी संधी आज की त्यांचं मार्गदर्शन आपल्याला भेटणार आहे. माझी विनंती राहील सरांना की त्यांनी आमच्या विद्यार्थ्यांना आणि सर्व स्टाफला योग्य दिशा अशा प्रकारे मार्गदर्शन करावं. सर्वांचं स्वागत आहे. धन्यवाद.
Thank you very much, sir. Honorable Resource Person, Dr. Vishwambar Chaudhary, respected Principal of our college, respected Head of Department of our college, faculties, participants, and my dear students. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome today's resource person. Today, we are celebrating World Environment Day. It is a reminder that we must take good care of our surroundings. Let us give our coming generations a healthier and happy environment to have a beautiful life. Best wishes on World Environment Day. I take this opportunity to introduce you all our today's speaker, who was my classmate and one of my best friends, Dr. Vishwambar Chaudhary, who acquired his master's degree in environmental science along with me from Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad, and PhD also from the same university. He is working as a director of OSS Consultancy, Pune, and residing there since last 27 years. He has the passion of writing. It is rightly said that reading makes a half man, writing makes a full man, and speaking makes a complete man. He writes on socio, political, and environmental issues on various topics in various journals, newspapers like Lok Satta, Maharashtra Times, Lokmat, Navakar, Sakar, etc. He is very social through the medium and writes on environmental issues in the column Samaj Bhan in Dainik Divya Marathi. He is exposed to social media and e-media where he participates in political, social movement, environmental discussion on all Hindi, English and mainly Marathi channels on various subjects like lectures on alternative development, sustainable development, policy, Lavasa Lokpal, Corruption-Free India, Land Acquisition Act, Constitutional Nationalism, Are India a Superpower or a Happy Nation? He has delivered around more than 300 lectures on the above subjects. He participated in mass movements and other social work where he was accompanied by Medha Patkar, Praneeth in National Coordination of People's Movement since last 10 years. He has actively participated in the fight related in 2013 by then Rural Development Minister Jairam Ramesh and Chairman of Standing Committee of Parliament Sumitra Mahajan for different water councils in many places in Maharashtra, as well as Irrigation, Land Acquisition Act, etc. In Lokpal active participation from the beginning at Jantar Mantar, he has participated in the agitation with Anna Hazare, and he has actively participated in the agitation for Lokpal in Ralegaon in December 2013. He also accompanied Anna Hazare in US tour in 2013 and had a dialogue with Indians of 10 US cities. He has delivered a research paper on the status of EIA reports on Western Ghats, which was chaired by Madhav Gadgil. He worked in different areas like anti-corruption, environment, water, irrigation, agriculture, sustainable development, politics, sociology, religion, and secularism. He is working presently as a special member of the Maharashtra Lok Ayukt Drafting Committee, which was constituted by Maharashtra government since 2019. He has been awarded many awards by the government of Maharashtra. On behalf of my college, I wholeheartedly welcome you to deliver your talk on development versus environment. Now it's over to you, Dr. Vishwambar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masrat Sultana. She is my classmate also. She is my very good friend also. And apart from that, I must tell to the students that she always stood first in our class throughout. Nobody could beat her in, getting the first position in the class. Thank you very much, Masrat, for introducing me to such a lovely gathering here. Thank you, Dr. Patil, Principal Sir, for inviting me here. It is very good to interact with the people, especially I have special affinity for entire Marathwada since I belong to a place called Parbhani. I am having a special affinity with the people of Marathwada, and therefore it is my pleasure to be here. In the next 1 hour, I will try to explain my views on the sustainable development. In the title itself, we have said whether environment or development. So there is a question mark there. I think I should start my presentation already late. So let me start with my presentation. I will now share my presentation with you. So this is the title of my today's lecture, Development versus Environment. And there is a question mark ahead, whether development and environment are conflicting with each other or they are cohesive. That is the chapter. Whether we can communicate better between them or whether we can just consider them as the enemies of each other. That is the very question before us. Let me tell you that I have the exposure from both the sides. I have been in development side as the consultant, as Mr. rightly said, as a consultant for last almost 25 years. I have also exposure to the NGO side because I have been working with Medha Patkar as she has already told it for a long time now, maybe around last 20 years. So I have the exposure to NGO side or whatever you say. I don't have any NGO, but as such the movement side of that also I have got the exposure. So maybe I am trying to correlate both of them, and I will definitely try to make a cohesion of them. I don't think that development and environment are enemies to each other, but they are cohesive and they can be very well tagged together for the betterment of the human life. Firstly, let us go through the definitions actually, because since I am talking before the academic people, this is a college and I am talking before so many engineers, would-be engineers, I should go a little systematically. That is what I felt. So let us go very systematically. So I will start with the definitions. Now, what definition? There are so many definitions of development. Many people are making it economy part of view. Many people are making it through different views. There are certain other views to development also. But in my view, as environmentalist, what I see as development is the value addition to the human being by virtue of innovations made by science and technology for sufficing human needs or improving life quality. That is very simple definition I make. The definition of environment also, there are so many definitions. Great scientists, they have evolved with lot many definitions. But for India, I think that only two components, two ingredients are required. So I have made the definition quite simple. That is, environment is surrounding of the living beings and coexistence of biotic and abiotic entities. In environment, not only biotic but abiotic entities also they exist, like structures of building and all, they are also part of the environment. And so we have to be cohesive with them. We have to understand them properly. And this is not a conflict, but it's a coexistence of the biotic factors like human being, animals, trees and all, and abiotic components also like technology, like buildings, like trains, like buses and all. So it is constituting both the things, biotic and abiotic. Third definition is certainly more important, that is sustainable development. So the word sustainable development ends the conflict between development and environment, and it says both can coexist very smoothly, both can coexist very happily together, and there is no conflict in that. So what is the sustainable development? There are only, again, two ingredients of that. Any development that is environmentally sustainable, number one, that is environmentally sustainable, and number two, it is socially inclusive, because we are a society we are a heterogeneous society. We have lot many people, lot many religions, lot many castes, lot many races and all. So it has to be cohesive. It has to accommodate everybody. That is what we mean by socially inclusive. Nobody should be left out, as our constitution guides us, equality and the justice. Nobody should be left over, and therefore the sustainable development must encompass one, environmental sustainability, and second is social inclusiveness. That is what I see it as in the context of Indian development. Now, what are the tools for sustainable development? It is okay, we agreed, everybody of us agreed that we need sustainable development, not only development destructing the environment, not only environment and there is no development, because we need everything. We need, since morning we need toothpaste for our cleaning our teeth, until the night we use good night as the mosquito repellent. So everything is required by us, everything consumes certain resources, and therefore there is a value for everything, there is a value to everything, and there is, of course, there is a consumption of natural resource for every one of us. So every one of us consumes petrol, diesel, every one of consumes water, every one of consumes all natural resources, including the land. So are there any key factors how the social sustainable development can go ahead? In my view, there are four factors which I am presenting here. First is the environmental laws, because unless there is law, people will not behave properly. That is the general psyche of the people. If I am running a car in Aurangabad, why only Aurangabad? Everywhere in Pune or Mumbai, if there is no police at the signal, I will just not bother the signal. If there is a police but signal is off, then still I will stop on his indication. So the thing is, law is very important. Enforcement of law is very important, and therefore first thing comes in environmental law. I just skipped to tell it to Dr. Masrat also. I have recently done LLB also. I have completed LLB last year only. So in my view, environmental laws are one of the tools for sustainable development. Second is green technology. Whatever is the problem, technology is the solution. You will see everywhere technology is, just like Pawar sir also said, technology is ruling everywhere. And there are so many green technologies evolving. I will make a very few mention of that because we don't have much time. I have been given 1 hour. So I will make mention of a few amongst those technologies. Third important thing is development planning. It is how you plan your development. That is very crucial. That is the crux of this lecture, in fact. How you plan your development, that is the key to success. That is the most important thing. We have to keep it in mind. And fourth is environmental activism. When none of them works, when none of them is working, or it is all against ethics, environmental ethics, then there comes the fourth important component, that is the environmental activism. Apart from these four tools, I am going to talk a bit more on two case studies. I have taken two cases for case studies. First is the very famous Narmada Valley project, Narmada Sardar Sarovar project, and other is the Lavasa project in township project in Maharashtra. So these case studies I am taking only for the theoretical purpose, for academic purpose, for the purpose of telling something to students of the engineering. So these are the things which I am going to talk about in my coming lecture. Let us come to first part, that is environmental laws. There is a certain constitutional mandate for environment. Article 21 of Constitution says it talks about right to life. Every individual, not only individual, every animal, every living entity has a right to live, which ultimately means that there is a state which is responsible for making the life easier. If there is a pollution and my life is suffering, there is a state to control it. So it is the state duty. State is bound to protect the lives of the people, and there is a right to live life for everyone. So that is the very, very important. And if you see all the cases, Supreme Court cases and all, you will find this is the major thing which is protecting our fundamental rights. Because to live or to be alive is a fundamental right, and that is protected by Article 21, very powerful article. It is there since day one of the Constitution. Second is Article 51. This is directives for state policy. Through the 51 article, the Constitution gives certain directives to the state. How should you rule? What are the weaker sections of those who you must be taking care of? What are the weaker sections, like say women or children, to whom you should care about, and in what way you have to care? So what the directives of state policy say? It says to protect, it is the state duty to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for all living creatures. Compassion is the very basis of all Indian ethos. If you see from Gandhi, from Kabir, from Tagore, Buddha, Mahavir, everybody is talking about compassion. So this article also talks about compassion. It says that we must have a compassion for all living creatures. They are coexisting with us. Earth does not only belong to us, earth belongs to them also. So it is better we live cohesively, we live in a harmony. That is what the Indian Constitution guarantees. Now, the obligations of the state in securing the environment are fundamentally the rights of the citizen. It is not the favor that some government is doing to me by protecting the environment. It is not the favor by state government or central government or municipal council that they are protecting the environment, but it is their duty. They are duty bound. Constitution provides them a duty to protect the fundamental rights of all of us, which means that our fundamental rights are protected by the state. there are certain environmental laws and they have been evolved. I have written the word, if you mark it here, evolution. There is certain evolution. How it evolved, that is very interesting story. I have written a Facebook post today. Those who can read Marathi, they can see it on my Facebook wall also. But this is the interesting story, how it evolved. Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974 was our first post-independence act in the field of environment. Pre-independence, the British also, they have made certain laws regarding forest and all. Like Forest Act is also there, that is also quite old. But the first Indian law purely made by Indian Parliament, not by the British government, was Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. Let me add something here, which is really a matter of pride for us. We always have, pride of so many things, and we always have pride of our state also, Maharashtra also. But we have it many times for very wrong things. Let me put it here. I am very proud that 1974 Act of India was initially enacted by Government of Maharashtra Legislative Assembly in the year 1969. So we have been ahead of the whole country for a period of almost 5 years. 5 years we have been ahead of country, and this country has followed us, Maharashtra. Country has followed us in making the first legislation. So that is the first act, Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. CES Act was a bit part of the Water Prevention Act, but the another act was Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. Through the 74 Act, we have certain regulations for protecting the water from getting polluted or getting it treated after the pollution. And through air, we have ensured the air quality, which we breathe. So that air quality we have ensured through the Air Act 1981. However, these two acts, they have come out of the wisdom of the legislation. They have not been compelled by somebody or forcefully. They have been with the wisdom of the legislation. But it did not work fully. And as every one of us knows, that very, very, very tragic Bhopal gas tragedy was there in 1984. Thousands of people have lost their life, and this country has gone into a shock literally, because that was a very huge environmental disaster in the country, maybe first in the independent India. So everybody was shaken, and that forced the legislation, that forced our parliament to enact the other law, that is Environment Protection Act of 1986. Now this act is called as Umbrella Act, but I don't consider it as Umbrella Act, as it does not have mention about many more environmental components. So maybe this was the comprehensive act, we can say, but it cannot be said to be an umbrella act. Then came the hazardous waste, because industrialization started. There was a lot of generation of industrial waste, hazardous industrial waste. So we felt a need of having the legislation for hazardous waste management and handling rules. Those came in 1989. Then there was certain law about the hazardous chemicals. But let me tell you the very interesting story of Biomedical Waste Act. How did it came into the existence? In Chandigarh, there was a government dust, what you said, not dustbin, but you can say the where the garbage is collected by the government, that a particular center where garbage collection is done. There they found some human body parts there. They found a leg which was cut off after the gangrene. We know that leg is amputated if the gangrene exists. So the amputated leg was found in the garbage yard. This was a great news for media, and there was a lot of uproar on that. Supreme Court, the case has been filed. It has gone to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court directed that the biomedical waste cannot be thrown like this. It must be incinerated scientifically in a furnace which is having the temperature not less than 1100 degrees Celsius. So at a very high temperature, it has to be burned fully so that it becomes non-toxic. It turns into ash. There are no harmful things in the ash, and the gases which come out of the incinerator, those also you have to scrub properly. That was the Biomedical Waste Management and Handling Rules, 1989. Then came the Plastic Waste Act, then the Noise Pollution Act, and so on. Batteries Management and Handling Rules, they also came in 2001. And the most important was Environment Impact Assessment Notification 2006. The story behind this law is also very interesting. there was a news item in Hindustan Times in Delhi, and that title of the news item was "And quietly flows Maili Yamuna." So it gave the detailed, figures and everything of the debris which is coming into the river Yamuna in Delhi because of the construction activity or because of the builders' activities as such. So Supreme Court said, bring them under the environmental regime, and they were brought under the EI notification 2006. That is the latest one, which is making a lot of impact. So I mentioned. So this is the frame of law. Why we need laws is to ensure that the development is not rampant, development is not destructive, rather it is sustainable. It is going with the environment, not against the environment. That is the reason we have been evolved with so many environmental laws. I told this to the engineering students because somewhere in their career, they will be joining some factory or they will be joining some other authority like if they are civil engineers, they will be joining the road making projects, they will be joining so many projects. They should know that there is a certain framework of law within which we all have to work. We cannot go beyond that. So if you are a safety officer in the industry, if you are an engineer, safety maintenance engineer in industry, or whether you are a manufacturer, you have to abide by these laws. So that is the reason I mentioned it in full details. Now coming to technology, there are so many technologies evolving. The scenario which was there 25 years back, it is not there now. I remember when I started working with a consultancy in 1994. I did MS in 93 and 94. I joined the company in Pune. While traveling, you were easily able to know that there is somewhere a foundry here, because there used to be a lot of smoke, there used to be a lot of red dust on the road, and it was very easy to predict that there must be a foundry nearby. Or you must have observed the smell from a sugar factory. It was very obvious. Whenever we used to cross some places on the highway, you used to smell certain smell of the molasses, and then you would be easily recognizing that there is somewhere there is a sugar factory. That was the scenario. Now that scenario is quite changed. I will not say it is totally changed, but it is quite changed. I have been a consultant to so many foundries, and I have observed those changes in the last 25 years. There are so many changes. Now, for example, air pollution. Now there are technologies to control the source emission also, process emission also. Let me clarify what is source emission and process emission, because you people are not from hardcore environmental background, you are from the engineering background. Source emission is the emission which comes by burning of certain fuel from a source. Like diesel generation set, there is a fuel, there is a emission. From vehicle, there is emission. Or you might have seen the chimney stacks of the various industries. Smoke comes from there. So there is something burning behind. There is something burning which is causing the smoke, and smoke is coming out of that chimney. That is called source emission. And the process emission is a little bit different. I will give you the example. If you observe this first photograph, this is the process emission. What is happening is that this is a furnace. In Marathi we call it bhatti for easy understanding. I am telling this he bhatti hai Marathi, which is having a very high temperature. The scrap of the iron scrap or something, whatever, copper or whatever you have, that is poured to the furnace, and it is heated at a very large temperature, maybe at around 800 to 900 degrees. So that metal inside, that scrap gets melted, it's a molten metal formed, and then it is poured into certain kind of things like I don't call how to pronounce it in, I don't know what is the word for it in Marathi, like sacha, it is poured into the now, if you see, here are certain vapors coming. Those are from this process. They are not the source emission. No oil is burned, nothing. This is from the process. That process is giving emissions, certain emissions. So that is the process emissions. Now there are certain control technologies. If you see the hood here, there is a hood. This is a furnace from where the emissions are coming. These are sucked by this dust collection system or whatever the fume collection system, and it is brought to the electrostatic precipitators or backfilters, etc. And that dust gets trapped there. So you get a clean airflow, and dust is getting trapped there. There are so many control technologies like dust collectors, electrostatic precipitators, we call it ESPs, back filters, and scrubbers, so on. So there are so many technologies now evolved wherein the air pollution can be very effectively controlled, and that is the sustainable development. It doesn't harm to environment. At the same time, it produces many things. That is the sustainable thing. In water pollution also, there are industrial effluent treatment plants, multiple effective evaporators. I have put pictures of that. This is the effluent treatment plant. You might have seen it near Aurangabad also. There are a couple of common effluent treatment plants also in MIDC of Waluj and Chikalthana. You must go there and observe what is it. That is the true environment day. Because these days we are only celebrating the days and we are not calibrating ourselves. That is what I usually say. Celebration is important, but more than that, our own calibration is important. Our environmental sensitivity, our knowledge of environment, and our overall approach to the environment, that matters a lot. And therefore, we must visit the plants, we must see what technologies are coming up, what is the new thing, and how effectively that can be controlled. I have mentioned here about two type of effluents. First is the industrial effluent, and second is the domestic effluent, sewage. Everybody of us, we generate sewage every day. So sewage treatment plants are also now working very effectively. Technologies like MBBR, that is moving bed biofilm reactor, or fluidized aerobic bed, that is FAB, they are evolving. When me and Masrat, we were in MSc, we never have seen these technologies because they were not innovated. That was a very traditional method wherein you have aeration tank and all these things. That is all gone now. Now the things are evolving and we have very advanced type of treatment technologies there. And the efficiency is also very high. The traditional STPs were given the BOD less than biochemical oxygen demand, less than 100. Now there are certain treatment plants in which wherein you can achieve a BOD of less than 5 mg per liter. So that is a great efficiency and the technology is going ahead. This is a sample which I have I have brought from one of our clients, that's Tata Motors Pimpri. Why I am showing you this is all developed on the treated wastewater. That is the relevance. They have thousands of liters of wastewater every day because they are making cars, trucks, and whatnot there. It's a very huge manufacturing facility. They have got thousands of liters of effluent every day. What they have done is they treat it fully, just to the drinking level, you can say, and then they have developed a very beautiful lake called Sumant Sarovar, that is named after Mr. Sumant Mulgaonkar, who was the man behind the formation of Tata Motors. So, you know, on his name only there is a car called Sumo, that is Sumant Mulgaonkar M. So that is how they have developed. There are hundreds of trees, thousands of trees, I would say, and there are at least 16 to 17 types of birds they are existing here. So this is what is happening out of the wastewater from industry. This is very remarkable because wastewater generally is a liability that has been turned into asset here, and now they are using this wastewater and they have developed such a beautiful ecology which is very it has improved the aesthetic sense also. At the same time, it has helped environment also in terms of generation of oxygen, about which Principal Sir was talking a little while ago. Noise pollution also, there have been so many technologies like ear plugs, ear muffs, attenuation measures. They are making so many attenuation measures now. If you see the engine testing bed of any automobile industry, it produces a lot of noise to the extent of 120 decibels. But there are so effective ways now to control that in-house also. It is not that only outside of the people suffer from pollution. The noise pollution, air pollution, inside people also suffer. So work zone air quality and work zone noise quality is also important for a factory. And noise pollution is a very important thing because if you don't control noise, you will get fatigue and finally deafness. And it might have certain impacts on your brain also. Equilibrium also is being disturbed. So there are so many technologies coming up for noise pollution also. I will stop for the technology part here and I will go to the next part, which is I told very crucial part. As Dr. Masrat mentioned that I had been to US with Anna Hazareli. We have been to White House, and certain people asked me there why you people are agitating against the development. When I told I am with Medha Patkar and Anna Hazare also is a very good environmentalist, they asked why are you going against the development. I told them there are so many issues I cannot explain you in this short time. But let me understand how do you control this? How do you control these agitations? How do you control your development process? How you ensure that people don't go against the development? That's what I asked him. And he gave me a very interesting answer. First three things are from him. Rest three things I have added in the Indian context actually. So he said, first of all, we have very strict development planning department. There is a separate department called development planning, which is scrutinizing every development. Every development has to go through a scanner. And unless it is scanned, unless it is proven that no, this is not going to make a much environmental impact, then only it is allowed by the government. Now there are three basic things. And not only US, I have inquired in Europe also, in Germany, Switzerland, England, everywhere. They are just sticking to three benchmarks. These are the first three benchmarks: carrying capacity, cost benefit analysis, and analysis of alternatives. This is very interesting. Let us understand it one by one. I will spend a little more time on this slide. Carrying capacity, by carrying capacity, we mean that the capacity of that certain area to tolerate certain pollutant. For example, if there is a lot of generation of sulfur dioxide, that area becomes sulfur dioxide saturated, and then you cannot put more plants emanating sulfur dioxide there. Same thing happens over the dust or every pollutant. Now carrying capacity is something beyond which they will not allow the development. For example, Aurangabad district has a carrying capacity of say X amount of carbon dioxide. So they will plan the development likewise that threshold limit shall not be exceeded. You cannot exceed that carrying capacity. I will give you exactly reverse what happens in our country in India. Ratnagiri district alone has a proposal of 21 power plants, making power, thermal power, that is from the coal, we all know about it. So making Ratnagiri a hub for the electricity generation would be disastrous if 21 plants came, because the entire Ratnagiri district would be suffering from a lot of pollution because of ash which comes from the thermal power plant. So you have to keep it decentralized. You cannot just go to a place and say everything will be manufactured here. You cannot go and say that all the electricity will be manufactured here only. That is not a good development plan. So carrying capacity, Ratnagiri, 21 power plants if they are coming, the entire district will be collapsed. Their pollution threshold limits will be over, and that will be, because another factor in Ratnagiri is they don't have a free wind as we have. There is a wind from the sea, we know. There is a lot of sea wind, we know about it. But then Konkan is in such a position that there is a Western Ghat just on the other side of that. So they will be trapped between the sea winds and the Western Ghat, and the entire pollution will be sticking to the Ratnagiri itself. It will not be dispersed properly. So carrying capacity is very important. Then second is cost benefit analysis, and in this our irrigation projects are the damn thing. I must say that that's the best example how the cost and benefit does not match. What is the cost benefit analysis? It is basically very simple. We get certain benefits, and for that we have to spend certain cost. So if the benefits are more than the cost, then only the project is feasible. For example, if I am setting up one, say I am having certain cost for that, I must get the benefit out of that. Otherwise the model is not good. Otherwise I am at the loss and I have to shut down my factory. So benefits have to be more than the cost. That is true about the corporate world. That is true about the social world also. When you go for any social change, the cost of making that, it must be less than what the benefit you get. So in irrigation scam of Maharashtra, you all know about it. there was a huge cost spent for irrigation of 1 acre. Like if I remember it properly, every acre there was 2 lakh rupees of cost spent for irrigation. Now 4 lakh rupees of cost was spent for. Now anybody will think this is going beyond the threshold. This is absolutely a wrong expenditure of the public exchequer. That is the taxpayers. So that is the cost benefit analysis, wherein you must judge. Costs are not only economical. Let me clarify it here. When you go for a development and when you cut, say, 200 trees for one road, there is certain environmental cost which you have paid, and that cost never reflects in any of our documents. Only people will report that for Aurangabad to Pathan road, 200 trees were cut, but that those trees are having certain cost. For example, I had a laboratory a few years back, and we have made an experiment that how much oxygen is generated by an average size, tree, say 10 years old tree. So we have come to the conclusion that in the whole lifetime, that particular tree gives the oxygen, even if you consider that to the cost of the oxygen which we get in the government medical hospitals as such, 35 lakh rupees cost throughout the lifetime oxygen that is generating. So which is obvious that oxygen has certain cost, but those are not calculated in our development planning. That is a great flaw. We don't calculate environmental costs. Like there is a diversion of some nala or diversion of a river, we don't calculate that in the environmental cost. It has a huge cost. Second is the cost benefit analysis. Third is the analysis of alternatives. Now what is this? This is very simple. If I am proposing a plant, say I want to erect one chemical plant, and I am searching a place for that. Then I have to give 3 alternatives, environmentally sound alternatives. Like this was the place I considered, but there is a river close to this, so this will not be good. Another place I considered was this, but there is no good airflow, so the pollution will not get dispersed properly, like that. So you have to provide 3 alternatives for location, and government will tell which is environmentally sustainable. You have to tell 3 alternatives for technologies. If it is copper smelting, by what way I am going to smelt the copper? If it is for foundry, which pictures I have shown you. If it is foundry, what is the technology I am using? Am I using the coal-fired furnace? Am I using the fuel that is oil-fired furnace? Or I am using a clean technology, that is the gas-fired furnace or electricity-fired furnace, electrical induction furnace. So these options have to be given, and then they will tell us what type of options to be taken. So there is an analysis of alternatives for location, alternatives for technology. Not only that, it doesn't stop here. Pollution control also, we have to give them 3 different alternatives. Like effluent treatment plant, why this technology is better than that, how I have compared with other 2 technologies, that is what we have to say. Now here in India, no such type of thing happens. No impact assessment report will have analysis of alternatives because it is not mandatory from the side of government. Let me tell you one classic example of Jaitapur. Jaitapur, we have been told that this is a atomic energy plant, nuclear energy plant, and this will give us, electricity. Nowhere in the Jaitapur report, they have compared this with the environment-friendly energy, say solar energy or wind energy. They have never compared it. If you are making a project in US, you will have to give a comparison chart of how solar is effective, how wind is effective, or whatever atomic energy, nuclear energy. So this is the difference between development scenario in India and Western world, and that is where we are defeating ourselves. We are having no benchmarks. We don't stick to that. There is a lot of corruption in the pollution control boards. So we are really in a mess, different mess. We live in a pollution sink actually. And for that, this development planning is required. Now, apart from these 3, what I have gathered from the White House, India also needs to have certain other parameters, and that is the rest of the 3. That is decentralization of the development, human face to the development, and transparency and environmental ethics. Let me come to the decentralization first. Gandhiji always said that small is beautiful, because small is easy to maintain, small has less cost, and small can probably accommodate many people. If you see so many small scale of industries like what we call them, I don't know, in Marathi we call them kutir udyog, uh, very small tiny industries. Something is manufactured at the home only, that is called the kutir udyog. So many people who were weaving the clothes, were dyeing the clothes, and we were having handlooms for making clothes. They have been devastated once these electrical looms they came. So technology always deprives some people from their jobs. That's not a good thing. We have to train them and accommodate them in this. Or we have to decentralize the development. Now, what is the development really called? I always wonder what is development. Marathwada and Vidarbha regions, they are famous for manufacturing soybean. Probably they are amongst world's most hotspots for the manufacture of soybean. I rarely see any oil in there which takes soybean oil out, makes soybean differently, or so many numerous products are made out of the soybean. But there are no local industries. And the result is that farmers sell it at a very cheap price, and the buyers of the ultimate product, they take it at a very heavy price because there is a chain in between which is manipulating the things, which is making real profits. So in India, decentralization of development is a must. If you do not decentralize it, what will happen is entire Marathwada people will come and reside in Aurangabad, entire Vidarbha people will come and reside in Nagpur, entire Western Maharashtra will come to Pune, and Mumbai, entire people from the whole of the nation, they will come to Mumbai. That is only because we have not decentralized our development. In Maharashtra also, Pune, Mumbai and Nashik and to some extent Aurangabad, those are the four corners. You don't see any development in Akola, Amravati, Nanded or so many places. So we have to decentralize this development so that the population can be distributed properly. Otherwise, there is uneven distribution of population. Otherwise, people are rushing to Pune. Pune is becoming very crowded. Mumbai has already collapsed almost. Mumbai is no more a livable city, let me tell you. It has collapsed due to the population. You cannot imagine, it's more than 2-3 small European countries made together. That is Mumbai, population wise. So it is all collapsing. So we have to decentralize our development. For example, I'll tell you a very ultimate example how our political system does not even think about it. Software or say this information technology, IT. IT is the business which can be operated remotely. There is no need that all the IT industries should come to Pune only. They can be in Parbhani, they can be in Jalna, they can be in Yavatmal, they can be in Wardha, anywhere, because they are operating remotely. They don't need any closer infrastructure. It's not a manufacturing facility that some raw material is required and so we have to have acquaintance with the raw material. It's not the thing. The thing is, it is an open air business. It can be done anywhere, and you can therefore make IT hubs in Yavatmal also, Wardha also, and for so many places. That is not being made. There are certain political interests, and I'm not going to talk about that. But yes, we need to decentralize our development. Fifth and very important is human face. I get irritated when people quote the example of China. Please remember, there is no democracy in China. You are very much protected in India. I'm sitting in my office today. I know for sure nobody is going to acquire it. I know for sure government is not acquiring it without, consulting me. It's not like that in China. They come and stick a paper to your wall that this house is going to be demolished after 24 hours. You just go from here. That's not a good model. Many people educated, I get surprised when educated people talk very high about China. There's no democracy at all. They don't believe in democracy. There is no democracy. There is nothing for poor. There is no that is not a welfare state. India is a welfare. We must be proud of our state. These days people are saying we need dictators. No, dictators are very bad. Please go to the Germany, please go to various places where Hitler has his concentration camps. You do visit it and then you realize what the dictatorship is. So India is a slowly growing nation. That is all right. Our growth rate is very slow. That is acceptable, but that is growing with some human face. We have good rehabilitation policies. resettlement policies, we don't kick off the people from the side and say, we want a project here, you go off. That's not the case. That is a very important thing. That is the crux of our entire Indian ethos, that is the Indian democracy. So let us remember that every development must have a human face, and other, if it is not having human face, then it is in vain. It is for a few handful of people who will be getting benefit out of that. So development has to have a human face. And last is transparency and environmental ethics. Transparency is what I am producing, how much I am polluting, I must declare it. It is understood that comes without pollution. Even you cannot cook without the pollution. Whenever you use oil or anything in the cooking, there has to have some air pollution. So there is a pollution, but how transparent I am in dealing with it, how transparent I am in declaring it. Now you see everywhere, all industries, it is mandatory for them to display on the board in their gate only regarding the pollution they generate. How many people they transparently write there, I don't know. And environmental ethics, I have seen many companies who discharge their waste oil at the night when nobody is there in the rivers. It's very bad. Environmental ethics is something which cannot be controlled by the law. It has to be controlled by yourself. Like what Gandhiji was saying, he was saying believing more in ethics than in law. So in ethics, we should not do that, and that should not be our ethical practice. Whether it is legal or illegal, that comes later. It should not be like spitting on the roads. I don't know why people spit. This is environmentally wrong ethics. You are spreading the diseases. But many educated people also, they spit in the roads. That is the environmental ethics which should be governed. So I consider that any development plan must encompass all these 6 things. Moving ahead, this is environmental activism. I wanted particularly to know from the young people, young engineers, becoming engineers, how many of you know about them? Like if you have interactive, can I hear to you also, or there is only one-way communication?
No, sir. It's two-way communication.
Okay, great. Then I am just pointing out. Can someone from the students tell me who is she? Who is this lady? Anybody knows who is this lady? The only
No,
lady.
sir.
Okay. Well, this is Medha Patkar. To her right is Anna Hazareji. We know most of them because he is from Maharashtra only. Medhata is also from Maharashtra, but resides mostly in Narmada Valley. He is Dr. Rajendra Singh, who did a lot of experiment in water, and he's called Jala Purush of India, Waterman of India. He is the one who recently died, forefather of all these people, Sundarlal Bahuguna, who was associated with the Chipko Andolan in the Himalayas. He is called as the saver of the Himalayas, Rakshak of Himalayas, that is what he is called. And this gentleman, you might not be knowing more about him, very genius person. He is always away from the fame. He doesn't appear on the TV like I have been. He never appears on many public platforms, but he is very close to your place. He is from Jalna, and his name is Vijay Anna Borade, and he has done a model for sustainable water development. You must go to the village called Kadvanchi. Maybe Masrat madam will take you as a study tour, and you must meet this person and see what experiments he is doing. So by putting his photo here, what I wanted to tell you, environmental activism is not only the movement against something, but it is creating something also. And that is what they have created. Anna has created a model in Raleigh City, model for water, and same is about Vijay Anna Borade. So these are the people in making also. Generally, you people see to us as the people who stop everything. They don't want development, and they get funds from the abroad and all these things. But let me tell you, environmental activism is not about destroying something. It is about creating something also. The Narmada Bachao Andolan, we have created Narmada Jivan Shala, that is called as Narmada Jivan Shala, life schools for Adivasis. So we people in activism, we are not only destructive. Yes, we try to destruct pollution, we try to destruct the corruption, everything. But then there is other positive side of that. we want to create something. We are into creation of something, and that's why I put the pictures, photos of these people. Now I am coming to the last but a little comprehensive part of my entire speech today. It will go for another 20 minutes, I think. So for 10 minutes, I will talk on the case study of Narmada Valley project, and for rest of the time, I will be talking on another case study. Now, Narmada Valley project was very much in discussion before we were students. It started somewhere 30 years ago, maybe in, I think in 1985 it started. And the issue was there was a dam making on the river Narmada. People always mislead by the name Narmada Valley project. They think it's only one dam. It's not only one dam. It is a chain of dams. So many big and small dams are there. That is a chain of dams. It was recently in the news because of the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel statue, the great statue of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, which was made by affecting more than 21 villages. I will come to that afterwards. With absolutely nothing political I want to talk, but I want to talk about the environmental destruction out of these activities. Now, Narmada Valley project was it was conceptualized. All the Adivasis there, they were issued a notice that you vacate your place and we want to have a great dam here. So many things have happened. Till Supreme Court, the case has gone. Unfortunately, Narmada Bachao Andolan lost in the Supreme Court. That is all right. But there are certain good things that have happened out of this Andolan, this Narmada Bachao Andolan. You know it was led by Megha Patel. What has happened was that there was no rehabilitation plan. No land was given to people, no homes were given, no shelter at all, nothing. So people were left to their own future. You do whatever you want. And the struggle of 30 years, if I show you some pictures, these are a few pictures of the Narmada Andolan, and that is still on. Don't consider that is all stopped now. That is still on. People are still asking questions to the government. Why you want to raise the height of the dam? Why you want all our land under the water? If you see the board this gentleman is having, who is the state to encroach our lands? That is a very key issue. Who is the state if I have got my land from my ancestors? How the state can come one day and say, I want your land for this thing. All right, now here there are two views. Some people might say that, no, you should not give the land. Others may say that you have to give the land, you have to make some sacrifice for society, but you should not be left, you should not be left without any benefit of the land. You need to have certain benefit. You need to gauge the cost of the land. You need to get a good resettlement and rehabilitation. So this gentleman, he is asking very appropriate question. Who is the state to encroach our lands? State has not given us the land. Why they should encroach? My ancestors have given me the land, and that is my livelihood. I am making up my money out of that land. I am making my survival out of that. Why that land I should give? There was a lot of uproar. There was a lot of agitations. It was not only India, world over people were taking cognizance. So many. World Bank also took the cognizance, and they have issued a notice to government for this. It was a great type of satyagraha. That is the insistence for truth, or we believe in truth only. So satyagrahi, that was the satyagraha. If you see this picture, they are in the water fully, because the height was increased without telling people, and a lot of submergence was there. A lot of land got submerged because the height was increased. There were many problems with it, and people have lost their homes and all. So all these ladies, they are standing in the river, in the dam water. They are saying either we will die or you give us our homes, you give us some land, you give us some survival. That is what they are saying. This is Megha Patel, of course, standing. And these are, I have purposely, kept these pictures because you should not understand only one angle of development. You have to understand benefit also, but you have to understand the cost of development also. At what huge cost we are developing. That is the very crucial issue. And that is the reason I kept these pictures in my presentation. So coming back to the Narmada Valley project, what has happened that after these 30 years of struggle, great struggle, You might also see uh, uh, one documentary or sort of a film on that, that is called Lakir Ke Us Par, that is made in Hindi by Shilpa Bhallar, and the name is Lakir Ke Us Par. If you want to thoroughly understand what Narmada Andolan was for and what it achieved, you must see this movie that is called Lakir Ke Us Par. There are two words, as Sharad Joshi usually said, he was the farmers, Shetkari Sangatna leader. He said always that there is a India and there is Bharat inside the India also. So there is certain Bharat type of thing on which India always encroaches. India wants benefits, India wants electricity, India wants, that is, we people, urban people, we need electricity, we need water, and for which we are taking others granted. We need roads for which we take farmers granted, that we need this road from Mumbai to Pune, express highway with 6 lanes and all, and you give us the land for that. That is what we expect from the farmers. So that is a very crucial issue. Somebody is losing and you have to be with loser. And if you want to, be inclusive socially, if you want a sustainable development, you have to be with loser. You have to ask him, what are you losing and how much should we compensate you? That is what is the environmental ethics also is demanding. Rehabilitation of 45,000 families, you can imagine that comes to around 2 lakh people. If Narmada Andolan would have not been there, 2 lakh people would have lost their lives permanently. I mean, the livelihood, not the lives, but livelihood permanently, because there are no means of earning. They are only dependent on the agriculture, and they would have lost their land, and no package would have been given. There is a lot of environmental degradation out of this project, flora and fauna. When you go for very big dams, flora and fauna has to go. Some trees have to be cut. Property also, loss of public property, because so many villages have been affected. Almost 90 villages have been affected. More than that, I'm sorry. So what has been lost? The government infrastructure, wherein the money was already put by government, like some school was built in a village, that has been lost. That is government's loss, which is our loss in a way. We are, because we are taxpayers, we pay tax, and not only we are taxpayers, because I'm not talking only about income tax. A small person is also in the, even if he is buying a matchstick, this thing, then he is spending on that, because he is chargeable for GST. GST is already charged on all the goods. So every Indian is paying tax. Not only few people are paying income tax, all are paying GST. So let us understand that it is the waste of taxpayers' money. What has been lost? Schools have been lost, hospitals have been lost, temples and other religious places like mandir, masjid, churches, they have been lost. It was a great loss to property also, not only to the environment, but the property, which is a biotic component, that is also. Environmental degradation was there because they have cut thousands of trees for making the land for the dam. That is a drawback of a dam, that they need land clearance. Basically, they are for water, but they just damage the basic thing that contains water, that is the tree. And that is how the let me clarify one thing very categorically here. I am not against the dams. I am not against any dam. I am against the improper model of the water. If I repeat it, I am not against any dam. I am against the improper model of water. Where you need dams, you need those. For Europe, in Europe, you need dams. They are having dams. And other thing is, there is no sun at all for around 8 months. So you have a less evaporation rate also. In India, we have got 45 temperature in the month of May. And there is a huge evaporation. So it should be worked based on the cost-benefit analysis of alternatives, whether it is possible to have small check dams. Like Kolhapur, Bandharas, we have got Kolhapur dams and check dams and various. And if you come to, I invite you all to come and visit Ralegan Siddhi, Anna's village, wherein there is a beautiful concept how the water can be conserved. You don't need very big dams and a lot of expenditure and lot of land for that. You can conserve it in a very small way, and beautifully you can utilize that water. Ralegan Siddhi was once a village where people were not staying there in the summer. All the villagers were leaving the village because there was no water. And now that even sugarcane crop is taken. So you see, there are different, like what Popatrao Pawar did in Hiware Bazar, like what Vijay Bora did. So these are very important models, crucial models for water harvesting. which already, I mean, which tell very clearly that you always don't need big dams. There is a different model of water. For example, for Marathwada, groundwater is the model. We used to have small wells everywhere in our house also. So there, the groundwater is the model because evaporation rate is very high. So water has to be there in ground only if it has to be protected, else it will evaporate like that. So I am not against any dam, but I am against the method, I am against the technology, how the dams are made and necessity of the dams. That is the basic question I have got. Then there was loss of Adivasi culture, entire culture. When you say that this Adivasi village is now just going to be, dismantled and they will be settling somewhere in the city, then that entire culture is lost. There is a loss of culture also. There's a very specific culture. I have been seeing so many Adivasi communities, and let me tell you, they are wiser than us. The educated people think they are wise, but Adivasis are far wiser than what we people are. They know how to deal with the nature. They know how to pamper the nature. They know how to face the nature also. And they know how to live with the nature. They live with the nature. They don't build so huge buildings. They live with the nature. They don't eat, everything, junk food every day. They live with the nature. They eat the fruits of the forest and all, and they live very cohesively with the forest. So all that Adivasi culture was lost. Then I mentioned about it, need not to mention it again. Huge rate of evaporation of water. So there is a lot of loss of water due to evaporation, because in a dam you keep the water for drying for around 8 months, or even if you exclude it is exposed to the sun. So that is therefore drying water, call it as, and that gets evaporated. Then after the project was executed, there was huge leakages through the broken canals. None of the Narmada canals are in well condition, even if you visit them right now. So there is again another loss of water because the canals are broken. Water seepages are taking place out of that. That was the huge leakage through the broken canals. Then there was a corporatization of the water and land. And now I am coming to the Sardar Patel statue here. It is completely a corporate event. It is being given to some company, 3,000 crores or something like that was put in the statue. We don't need statues, please. We don't need statues. We don't need new mandirs. We don't need masjids. We don't need churches. What we need more is hospitals. What we need more is schools. Now Corona has given us a lesson, very, very big lesson to us. We should not spend on statues. We should not spend on mandir and masjid, on church. We should spend on hospitals. We need good hospitals. In Corona, only hospitals were there for our rescue. No mandir has, or masjid has, or church has come to our rescue. So let us be a little wise. Let us be a little, sensible out of this Corona, and let us understand what our exact needs are. Let us categorize our needs. So corporatization of the water and land, as I told you about the Sardar Patel statue, we opposed it. It is not because we love Sardar very much. Sardar was a great leader of India. In the pre-independence era, Sardar Patel was a great leader, one of the greatest leaders of India. We have a high respect for him. But he himself also would not like that poor people's lands are snatched and his own statue is built. This is not the model which Sardar would have appreciated himself. So that is what we oppose it. Then there is a corporate action of us. Lot of water. I'll tell you so many dams in Maharashtra itself. I can point out 10 dams at least, wherein the dam was made for farmers. They said while making dam that this water is for irrigation of the land, which is very genuine purpose. We live on the, we need food for which the farmer will need the water. That is very genuine need. Nobody can object. But after making the dams in the name of farmers, they have privatized the water. Like Indiabulls company has got almost half a dam in Nashik. That is the case of Lavasa. So many things. So they make the dam in the name of farmers. They spend from the public exchequer, and who is getting benefit is the private corporates. So there is a nexus between politicians and corporates, and out of that they are taking advantage, which is not good. Water is everybody's right. Everybody has got equal right to the water because water is a natural resource. No government makes it. Only nature makes it. So that being a natural resource, we all have equal share in it, but there is a corporatization of water. There has been a huge corruption. Cases are pending in the Supreme Court. I won't talk much about that in the Narmada project. And the expenditure was 40,000 crores. That was what I heard last time. So many things have happened. So many corruptions. There are so many corruption cases. I cannot tell you the number. So many, everywhere there are corruption cases in the project. So what you get is corruption and a huge expenditure out of that. And what you get out of that is never calculated. Benefits are never shown on calculations because they know benefits are lesser than the cost they have paid. So that is how the government hides the things from us. They don't tell us the true benefits. They just show that there are so many benefits and all, but they never come across the figures because they know what we have spent is more than what we have achieved. So that is the case of Narmada Valley. And last 5 minutes only, I will come to the second case study, that is Lavasa Hill Station. This will take 5 minutes time, and then I will conclude. We can start question and answer. I will have to switch over to the another presentation. So I have written it here, continue to presentation 2. So I will continue now to the presentation 2. This is the Lavasa case. You know, there is a hill station coming up. It was coming up near Pune, and we have stopped it. I was the principal petitioner against this this project with Mrs. Meera Patkar. So what is that project and how does it hamper environment? I have kept this because you should know the development versus environment. Why we think that development is versus the environment. That is the reason I have kept this presentation for you. See this, Lavasa Corporation Limited is developing a hill station township project in the Mose River Valley. This is just on the banks of the Panchet Dam. You know, not Panchet, I'm so sorry. This is in the Mose Valley, Mose River Valley. It is called as Veerbaji Pasalkar Dam. That's a very huge dam which supplies water to Pune. Total 20 villages are going to be affected due to this project. A total of 10,000 hectares, that is equal to 25,000 acres, land will be used for project, which includes mostly the farmland and private forest or forest-like land. So there is some forest land also. Initially, the project has got a permission under the eco tourism project, and then it appeared that this is merely a construction project, not the tourism project. A large part of construction work has already been finished in the villages of Daswe and Mugao. 2 villages already gone, and remaining 18 villages can be saved, and we have saved those villages so far. I mean, at this time, at this point of time, at least till so far, we have been able to save those villages. Now I'll go brief about it. I'll not go into detail because there were so many 8 type of major socio-environmental issues involved. First issue was ecology. Large-scale ecological damages were there, threatening the health. Hill cutting was there. Flora and fauna was destroyed. Water body was destroyed. Then environmental violation of laws was there. Then forest. There was a breach of forest laws. Offence was booked against the company by government of Maharashtra. Land. Then there was a social crime of land grab, bad land use, and land pollution was also there. Town planning, very bad planning was there. Violation of TR rules, the TP rules, that is town planning rules. Special planning authority was given to this corporation so that they are their owners. They can pass any plan they want, and they are the owners for their own. No government will rule on them. That was what the situation was. They were granted a global FSI. I will not go into details, and slope analysis was not done because this is all hilly area. No slope analysis was done. But they were affecting water resources, downstream users. Pune's 1 month water was stolen by this particular corporation. Then constitutional issues were there. There was breach of Article 243 of Constitution of India because tribal rights, that's all Adivasi area, tribal rights were all gone. They were not having Gram Panchayat, nothing. That's only the private company which is ruling. There is no Gram Panchayat, there is no nothing. So that was a very serious breach of law. And there was social unrest because there were atrocities on scheduled tribes and weaker sections and local farmers. There were so many atrocities. I will not talk about it. Let us move ahead. Now this is the description I have given for this thing, but I need to show you some pictures first. Now you just look at these pictures. These are Google pictures. The first picture is from 20th October 2002. That is the date of this picture, how this area was. This is all Lavasa area. Now if you see 1, 2, 3, 4, I have marked this as 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now if you see in the place of 1, this is a water type of area, water line type of area. Second is fully water ahead. This is a dam. This is the dam on which this Lavasa was to build the homes. This is the place where they were having plans for building and construction. This is second number. This is also having water. Third number, there is a type of valley here, so there is also water here in 3. 4 is a part of that valley incoming water from here to the dam, so that is also there. 5th is again it's a green area next to the dam. This is how it is looking in 2002. This is all greenery here, very dense forest here. This is all seen in the picture, Google picture. This is the picture of 20th October 2002. Now see what happened in 2004. This is all land filled. So this is reclamation of land for big bungalows. In the earlier picture, if you see, this was with the water. Now it has been filled with the land. So they are reclaiming the land. Now if you see 4, this was just the water course coming. That is blocked and land is claimed. If you see 2 here, this was also a water type of thing, and which has been reclamation of land here. They have reclaimed the land here. 5 number, it was the land here. It has been devastated fully. This belt is entirely tree cutting is happened in 2 years. This is the picture of 23rd February 2004. This entire tree strip has gone away. Now this was still there 6, 7, and 8. This forest was still there in 2004 up to 2004. What happened to this forest is really shaking the minds of the sensitive people. See what happened to this. This is all gone for roads, for land, tree cuttings and all. If you see 6 fully trees are almost cut here. If you see the earlier picture, these are the trees here. This is the density, tree density. See what happened. Entire tree cutting. 7 also same thing. There was a lot of forest here in 7, circle 7. Now circle 7 is fully devastated. And circle 8 also, it was more densely populated by the trees. I mean, having a very high tree density that has turned like this in 2005. So this is what is the scenario of the development. The development is meaning for destruction. We were lucky enough that we had a very brilliant minister like Jairam Ramesh at that time, who stopped this project and issued the notice to project to stop the things. And now they have been, fined for making environmental damages. So this is how. I will not go to the criticalities of that, but let me tell you what effect ecology would have had if Lavasa would have set up. Lavasa is in the province of the Western Ghats of India, which is among world's 20 most ecologically sensitive hotspots. This is one of the hotspots in the world. That is, there are 20 in the world totally. So one of them is with us, that is the Western Ghats. Also, the UNESCO is considering to declare Western Ghats as World Heritage Site. See, such a dense tree density, such a beautiful forest. Western Ghats are very beautiful. You must see them. While you are student also, when you will pass out as engineer also, you must see the biodiversity of the Western Ghats. That is amazing. The government of India has specially constituted Western Ghat Expert Ecology Panel to control such ecological hazards development in the region. The panel has already submitted its report, and that has clearly said that there will be no construction project beyond 20,000 square meters in this area. I was a part of WGA as I have written on paper there. So I know the working of the Western Ghats because the scientist like Dr. Madhav Gadgil was heading it, and it has clearly stated no such project should come in the Western Ghats. That was very clear. Western Ghat region plays a crucial factor for monsoon of India. Monsoon is absorbed first from Western Ghats in India. We know it's the south west monsoon that is absorbed first. The first monsoon is received by the Western Ghats, so that will affect the monsoon of India and other meteorologically important parameters also. There are so many things. Then Naresh Dayal committee was set up, and that committee gave a very harsh report, and that's how this project got closed by the then environment minister. There was a breach of laws and so on. Forest also, there have been some complaints, and forest department has booked an offense against them. This is how they destructed. This is a reservoir, this is a dam during the summer. So what they did is they built so many structures in dam itself in the summer. So it is obvious that in the rainy season, that will overflow, things will be destroyed. That is for sure. These are some photographs. This is hill cutting, hill crushing, that is stone crushing permission was given by government for 1500 tons a day. It's a very huge quantity. So the hills have been cut and this type of metal is being made for construction. So that is the hill crushing. So stone crushing of 1500 tons per day. You can imagine how huge quantity that is. That was also given to them. Then this was under reservoir in the year 2004. Here it was a dam, completely dam, natural dam here, and they got constructions in the natural reservoir. There are certain land grab issues. I will not go to that. There are certain town planning issues, water resources, constitutional issues. I already mentioned there is a social unrest. And these people are there who fought against Lavasa. These are very small people, very poor people. They fought very firmly against Lavasa and they could win it. I am telling you, we, civil, what we call as the people living in the cities, we get afraid of so many things, but these are really bold people. They don't get afraid. They know how to protect their right, and that is the reason they could fought against such a big corporation. Very, HCC is a multi-millionaire corporation. These small people they fought against and they could win. They are the real soldiers. These days we call Corona warriors, so these warriors and those warriors. They are real warriors. They fought against the corporation and they could win their lands back. Now, most of them have got their lands back. Around 300 people, they have got their 300 acres of land. They have got it back. So these are the people to whom we must salute. I have very deep respect for them because they fought against a very big corporation. They fought against the government, against very big powers. They have fought. But these are few pictures when we have been there during this battle. Anna Hazare also joined us for certain satyagrahas in Lavasa. That's how we have been, dealing with the project like Lavasa. That comes to the end of my presentation. And thank you very much, everybody, for listening me patiently. It is almost an hour. I have taken you a lot of time. You might have got bored sometimes also. I'm sorry for that. And I hope you have really got something out of my lecture. I again thank to Principal Sir, entire staff of college, all the professors there, all the lecturers there, the staff of the college, the students, and especially to Dr. Masrat Sultana. She brought me here in front of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vishwambar. On World Environment Day, let us stop harming nature. Let us stop polluting it. Let us join hands to bring a positive change, to make planet Earth a much healthier, greener, and happier place to live. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I especially thank our resource person, Dr. Vishwambar Chaudhary, who despite his busy schedule has found time to grace this webinar and delivered such an interesting, effective, inspirational, and informative talk on development versus environment and inculcating his knowledge and expertise among the audience. I really appreciate your wonderful work. I owe special gratitude to our principal for his stewardship, support, vision, and commitment for this webinar. I am extremely thankful to our HOD for encouragement, guidance, and unstinted support. I would like to thank sincerely all faculties, participants, and students for their valuable contribution. Special thanks to the coordinators, Professor Abhijit Lahane sir, Professor Purnima Marwat, and Professor Kavita Pathak for the support and untiring efforts in making this webinar a resounding success. I thank one and all. Please fill the feedback form for receiving your e-certificates. So thank you very much, and I declare that this webinar is over.